Welcome to Immigration Uncovered, the DocketWise video podcast. I'm James Pittman. This is episode 35, and it is the first of a three-part series on becoming a great immigration lawyer. What does greatness mean as an immigration lawyer? And today's theme is living up to your client's trust. Greatness through earning and living up to your client's trust. And my guest today is attorney Tsui Yee. She is the owner of Yee Immigration based in New York. And she is a top-rated immigration lawyer. She's rated as a super lawyer. She has an OPPO rating of 10. Welcome, Tsui, to the program.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to talk with you for the next hour.
Wonderful. Well, I want to talk about, what trust and legal practice means. So let's get your thoughts. And I've invited you because you really stand out, and I've been following you for a long time on social media. You're very active in social media immigration lawyer groups as somebody who has really an exceptional and outstanding level of dedication to protecting and advancing your clients' interests and gaining them the immigration benefits that they're seeking. So I'm sure that in achieving the level of success in immigration law that you've achieved, that gaining the client's trust is a key aspect of that. So let me have you tell us what you mean by trust in the context of an attorney-client relationship.
Sure. Trust is fundamental to any relationship, especially the attorney-client relationship. I think it's a two-way street, right? So the client needs to have trust in the attorney, and also the attorney needs to trust in the client as well. There's so much at stake. For one thing, a lot of my immigration clients are facing, extremely stressful situations. Many of them are fighting deportation. So, I take my role as the attorney really seriously. When a client decides to hire you, that means that they're placing a tremendous amount of trust in you. And, it's not something I take lightly. So I try to always make sure that my clients trust in me by being as open and honest as possible when it comes to everything about their case, from my thoughts on what the strategy of their case is, to my recommendations, my advice as to what kind of immigration benefits they might be eligible for, to the timeline of everything, when should everything happen. I try to be as realistic as possible, and, also to kind of err on the side of caution and being conservative about, expectations. What are the reasonable chances of being successful? How long could this take? I'd rather kind of under promise and over deliver. I don't want to really get anyone's hopes up high unrealistically, because that just adds an extra layer of stress and anxiety, not just for the client but the attorney too, right? So for my clients, I try to be as upfront as possible. I share my honest thoughts about every aspect of the case. If I think a client does not have a strong chance at getting an application approved, I'll tell them that, and I'll say, you might want to think about applying, because the consequences, if there's a X percentage that your case might be denied, then you have to think about, well, what are the repercussions that can flow from that? Sometimes it's not just, oh, will immigration approve my citizenship application? What if they were to deny the naturalization? Are they then open to being placed into deportation proceedings? So sometimes the best action is not to take any action. And that's something that some clients may not be happy to hear, but I would, prefer to be able to go to sleep at night knowing that I told my client what my actual, honest professional opinion is.
It's some very important points you're making. I mean, it was one of the first things that I learned when I got out of law school was that there are no guarantees, right? There are no guarantees. Clients often want guarantees. There simply aren't any guarantees in law. And also very much like in the doctor-patient setting. I mean, you should have, even though it's not one of the model rules, it's still it should be one of your fundamental underlying principles is at first do no harm, right? The Hippocratic.
Absolutely.
So it is with immigration, especially since the person's administrative record follows them throughout their entire life, it is sometimes better not to do anything rather than do something which has a very small chance of success and potentially huge adverse consequences, which they can then follow them or cause other repercussions down the line. Somebody has a very, very weak asylum claim and they're out of status. Sometimes it's better not to, you know, file the I-589 and start that entire, process.
Absolutely. Yes, because it's not always a good idea to be on the government's radar. If someone is considered high priority for ICE purposes, then do you really want the government to know where you live, what your phone number is, who your family members are? Because whatever information you provide on these forms, I mean, you're providing biographic details, names of children, names of spouses. You're putting it out there. And, once you file something with immigration, it's there. It's going to follow you for the rest of your life.
Exactly. Well, there's a lot of elements to building trust with clients, and some of these are transparent communication, protecting the client's confidentiality and privacy, and also being reliable and being accountable to the client. So let's take these items one by one. Let's talk about transparent communication and how important is clear, honest, and consistent communication. And let's talk about a few examples of how transparent communication can kind of alleviate the client's anxiety.
Well, so that is one of the challenges that we as lawyers face, right? We have clients, they're understandably very concerned about their case, and a lot of the communications that I get from clients are they want a status update. My case hasn't been filed yet. Has immigration taken a look at it? When can I expect to receive a decision? And it's a lot to manage. I'm not going to lie. I'm a solo practitioner. I don't really have a lot of staff. So when clients communicate with me, I don't really have a buffer. I'm the person who's responding to the emails and the calls and the texts. Sometimes it can be a bit too much, but you have to come up with a system, whatever it is, to let the client know, like, these are my preferred methods of communication. Sometimes it's easier to streamline. If you're feeling, and I was at this at some point myself, I had given my cell phone number out to some clients. And before I knew it, they were sharing it with friends and relatives. And then I realized, okay, that's not a great idea. But I had clients reaching out to me on my landline, on my cell, through text, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, LinkedIn, email. And it's too much. It's too much for most attorneys to deal with. So there's a few things you could do. One is, to just kind of communicate what your boundaries are. Figure out what your boundaries are. Let clients know, if you call me at 8 a.m., I'm not going to be in the office, right? You can call me from this hour to this hour, Monday to Friday. If it's an emergency, of course, then, we can make exceptions. But just to let clients know, don't expect that if you text me at 3 in the morning, that I'm going to get back to you right away. Another idea is to just share updates with clients before they even reach out to you. This is something that I'm looking into doing, as opposed to responding to clients after they've reached out to ask about their case. Just kind of like being ahead of that and just saying, hey, this is just to let you know, there's nothing you need to do now, nothing you need to be concerned about. Your case is still pending with immigration. Here's their latest processing time on your type of case. We don't expect to hear anything for another 6 months, but we are on top of things. And I think that will help to cut down a lot of the worry, and the anxiety on the part of the clients.
Absolutely. These are really two really important points. I mean, setting the boundaries and, communicating with the client. What's the appropriate way to contact the office? I mean, you cannot, first of all, if you have clients texting you on your personal cell, calling the office, calling you on WhatsApp, first of all, it's overwhelming. Secondly, it's disorganized, and you cannot actually be sure that you are responding to people, and also keep records of your responses to them if you have a totally disorganized system like that. So you need to really straightforwardly communicate that right at the outset, how to contact and at what hours. And that actually, one of the things that some people do, some firms do, is put that in your welcome packet. If you have a welcome packet that you give to new clients, like, that should really be in there, or perhaps somewhere in the terms of engagement with the firm. Um, and then another thing is yeah, like you said, regularly updating the client. I mean, well, we're in the digital and largely and more paperless age, but years ago, people used to joke that clients think lawyers sell stationery because they'll ask for this type of letter, or that type of document, or whatever, and paper them to death. More is better than less. But the same thing holds true now in the digital age. I mean, regularly updating clients, and you can set, if you're using various technology tools, various practice management tools, various email systems or CRM systems. You can set this up to automatically send out updates, maybe every month or however often at some regular intervals with the client, whether or not there is movement on their case. So if they get a monthly email or monthly text from you saying, we don't have any new updates on your case, we are actively monitoring your case, we will, contact you again, we will update you again next month or whatever, that can often stave off them having to reach out and feel like they need the update because they're getting the update and they're getting enough of it where it's satisfying.
I've also shared with my client, with very simple to follow instructions on how they can look up the case status themselves. So just kind of giving clients a sense of agency that they don't have to rely on their attorney for any little bit of news about their case. So I think over time, it requires some training as well because not all clients are necessarily tech savvy or will want to look up the case on their own. But I found that by kind of like gently reminding clients, hey, this information is public. You can find this on immigration's website. And I just kind of break down and show them, hey, this is how you can look up your case, look at your receipt notice, your receipt numbers right there. All you need to do is enter it into the USCIS case status online, and they'll tell you what the latest is. If it's pending, it'll say it's pending.
One of the ways of doing that is at the outset of the representation, once you've agreed to take the case, you can actually have your paralegal or one of your staff have a little orientation with the client and show them that, if you're using practice management technology, like for example, DocketWise, you can have your staff show them how to log on to the client portal, how to go to USCIS and change their address and so forth. So that can be part of the orientation and sort of the new client sort of welcome as well.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm also thinking of putting together a few short videos to clients to actually show them like, okay, this is where you go. Here's the website. Click on that. Just so I think some clients would appreciate seeing the visual of how you would actually do it.
All right, so let's talk about confidentiality and privacy. This is super important in every aspect of legal practice, but there are legal and ethical obligations, obviously, for maintaining client confidentiality. Lawyers are obligated to maintain the client's secrets and maintain all information about the client confidentially. So tell me how important and what role those obligations play in your practice, how you go about maintaining client confidentiality, and what do you think about the idea that demonstrating respect for privacy is part of building trust with the client? And can you give me any real life scenarios where protecting client confidentiality becomes a paramount concern?
I was just going to say that, privacy and confidentiality, respecting those go hand in hand with maintaining trust in the attorney-client relationship. Especially in an area like immigration law, there are going to be cases where there is a dual representation issue, right? Petitioner and beneficiary, both in the family and the employment context. And there are some times where representation in a case can be a little tricky. What if you're hired by a couple to pursue a marriage-based green card application and then the marriage does not work out? What happens if one spouse is being abusive to the other, in which case the marriage adjustment all of a sudden can't proceed, and one spouse, the one who is the victim of abuse, tells you, my spouse is abusing me. Do I have any alternatives, such as a battered spouse petition? This is a scenario that comes up more often than, you know, unfortunately, it comes up fairly often. So what do you do as the attorney? But, if you are representing two parties, you're kind of bound by the rules of ethics. You can't really advise one party to the detriment of the other. So even if the spouse who's being, the victim of domestic violence comes to you, from an ethical standpoint, you can't really continue to advise that spouse, right? As non-intuitive as that seems, you're conflicted out and you need to refer both spouses out because not you're kind of caught in between the two in this case. Similar situations come up in the employment context
Yeah.
where I've been approached by both the employer as well as the employee about something confidential that they did not want me to share with the other, party from the employee side. I've had some employees say, oh, by the way, there was this minor criminal issue. Please don't tell my employer, but will this affect my visa application? You can't really advise in that situation. You have to, advise that they seek outside counsel, nor can you really divulge this to the employer, because if you do that, it would be to the detriment of the employee. So it's very tricky. You have to be very careful about preserving your client's confidential information, but also kind of making sure that whenever there's a dual representation, that all parties are aware of all communications, meaning there shouldn't be any kind of communications on the side between just the attorney and either the spouse or the employer, for example, petitioner versus beneficiary. That's a landmine, which I try to, as soon as I see as soon as any situations come up where, the interests of the parties diverge or may be in conflict, then I immediately advise both parties, look, there's an issue that has come up. I can't really further advise, and I recommend that you seek counsel independently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about is not only confidentiality, but the scenario of the dual representation that you speak of directly involves the ethical rules regarding conflicts of interest, which is our separate ethical rules. But confidentiality is also shaded into that at every turn. But what about processes in your office or rules regarding how you run your firm that you have put into place to protect clients' confidentiality and privacy?
Well, if I have any employees and staff, then I, have them sign agreements not to reveal any information regarding the clients that we represent, the type of cases. I'm also very careful. I do kind of post about my work, but I am very careful about not revealing any information that could lead to any kind of breach of confidentiality on the part of my clients.
If you're discussing a case with colleagues or something, and you're discussing the general fact pattern of the case, where do you think the line is?
I think you would just it's you have to kind of this comes with experience, right? Because what I'm thinking about immediately is the fact that there are a lot of online lawyer groups, especially, for example, on Facebook. I belong to a few that are immigration lawyer groups where members will post questions all the time, throw out a fact pattern and ask, what would you do in this situation? And, I've definitely seen some instances where the poster shared too much information. I mean, like, my general rule is if I'm asking colleagues for their input, I try to provide as little information as possible, because you just never know. If, let's say you reveal one detail about your client, whether it's, geographical location, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that someone could figure out or guess that, oh, is this the person or the company that they could be talking about? So just, as a general rule, the less information you share, the better, because, the internet is out there. Once it's out, once you've posted something, it's really hard to like retract that.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to talk in somewhat vaguely and in generalities. I mean, rather than say, an El Salvadoran, a middle-aged
Right.
El Salvadoran female who, lives in this neighborhood. I mean, that's too much information right
Yeah,
there. You could
exactly.
say, all right, let's talk about being reliable and being accountable to the client. So we've already talked about sort of boundaries with the client communication, but as far as being responsive to clients Meeting the deadlines, keeping promises. Talk about that. How do you go about making sure that you're doing those things?
Really need to say what you mean and do what you say. I mean, clients are relying on you. If you tell them that you are going to meet a deadline, then you really have to deliver, you know. Of course, there's always, life gets in the way. Sometimes there are unanticipated things that pop up, for example, death in the family or something like that. But I would never tell a client that I would deliver on something if I didn't think I could do it. If I think that I cannot meet a proposed timeline, I'll share that with my client, explain to them something has come up or, client of mine got detained or what have you. For the most part, I find that as soon as you notify clients and speak to them, communication is key. As soon as you notify a client to let them know, look, something has come up. I'm going to have to readjust, but I will try to work on this and meet the deadline as soon as I can. For the most part, clients are reasonable, right? They understand that things happen beyond your control. But it's truly important. Everything. When the more I think about it, goes back to this whole issue of trust. If you tell a client or anybody for that matter, you know, that you're going to do X and then you're flaky, you don't do it, you don't show up when you say you do, then that kind of it chips away at the trust. This goes to everything from being timely, keeping your appointments. I used to work at several firms where clients would have scheduled appointments with, attorneys at the firm. And because some offices are very high volume, it was a
You're right.
typical thing to have clients just kind of waiting in the waiting area for an hour, 2 hours. And so when I started my first law practice, that was just something that n- you know, promised to myself I would never do to my clients. If they, cleared their calendar and made it a point to get to my office on time and they booked me to see me at 3 p.m., I will see them at 3 p.m., you know. To me, that's very important. It's being respectful of other people's times. Um, so yeah, that's very important to me, keeping to my word.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the cattle call approach too, having clients visit the office. I mean, I've never been a fan of that. I've heard of some firms say, "Oh, just come between 8 and 12. It's first come, first serve." I mean, to me, that's
No, no.
just ridiculous. But by the same token, it is not uncommon to have clients come without booking an appointment or just show up. I mean, I don't know how often that happens with your practice, but it does definitely happen.
Yeah, I mean, I do know of other firms that have this kind of rolling, kind of like anyone can, no appointment required. And that would drive me crazy, to be honest. So for the most part, I do not see a client if they have not booked a time with me. Every now and then it does happen. I've had a few clients who never spoke to me, never bothered to call my office, just kind of show up and said, oh, I just, heard about you online. I mean, on a few occasions, I've kind of, agreed to see them if it was something like urgent or there was some kind of valid reason why they couldn't book an appointment with me first. But otherwise, I just tell the client, look, I'm in the middle of something. I have cases that I'm working on. And, for me to drop everything and to accommodate you, I mean, unless it's justifiable, unless it's my time is justified, for the most part, I would, rather that they follow the
Absolutely.
procedures that I've put in place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can't do that anywhere else, right? You can't show up at your dentist's office and just expect
Right.
and then be see. And so
The thing is, if you allow this to happen, then it's going to create a pattern and a practice.
exactly. No,
Pe-
that's again the boundaries. The boundaries have to be real in order to be effective.
Boundaries are so important.
For the benefit not only of you and your practice, it's for the benefit of all the clients
Yeah.
so that things stay in balance,
Hmm.
matters are getting worked on appropriately, things run in an orderly fashion,
Right.
and competent representation is the rule. So that's why these procedures exist and they need to be followed. All right, let's shift a little bit and talk about the importance of showing competence or being competent, and increasing your expertise and how that plays into gaining the trust of your clients. Lawyers are expected to engage in ongoing education, right? We have CLE requirements. It's important to stay updated. Immigration law is one of those areas that changes frequently because there are a lot of executive branch decisions that have major impact, right? And so, can you give me any examples of, beyond your regular CLE requirement, are there other examples where you've gone out of your way to, educate yourself or develop particular expertise and how that's benefited your clients by enabling you to devise a solution, a legal solution, or solve a complex problem that, you wouldn't have been able to do had you not taken on the extra mile?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think immigration is a very unique area of law in the sense that it's so complex that there are so many specialties even within immigration itself, so there's many immigration attorneys who only focus on one aspect, whether it's deportation, right? Removal defense, or just family based, or just humanitarian work, or just, EB1A, or just, employment. So, or EP5, right? It's really hard to say that you can handle all kinds of immigration cases because there's just too much to digest, right? The changes are constant, right? It's not a static area of law. And it's nearly impossible just to be expected to be on top of everything at the same time. There's not a day that goes by where I'm learning something new, right? And I've been practicing for 25 years now. I'm not, I think you have to have a sense of humility, like you can't ever be the expert of everything. And if you ever come to a point where you think that you are, that kind of means that, you're maybe missing out. Yeah. So the thing is, like, the way I taught myself how to do certain cases that I had no previous experience is I would volunteer to take on a pro bono case. That's how I started learning how to do special immigrant juvenile petitions. Because the benefit with taking on a pro bono case is, the support you get is pretty decent, right? You're not going to be filing something on your own with no one reviewing it. There's going to be like a supervisor within the nonprofit organization to be looking over, whatever you prepare, just to make sure that everything you know, um, is sufficient for filing. So, that's kind of how I learned how to do SIG. For O1s, I didn't really sign up for any kind of training, but I kind of educated myself, like I kind of, there's a lot out there that you can review yourself. So, for example, mandamus, that's something that comes up a lot. I hear from a lot of colleagues, and I get a lot of requests from attorneys asking, can you, co-counsel or mentor me on mandamus? There's so much, there are so many resources out there, right? If you go to AIC's website, there's so many samples and practice advisories. You don't necessarily have to take a CLE on a mandamus in order to learn how to file them. They're not crazy complicated. And that's kind of how I got started filing my first mandamus, is getting a hold of the practice advisory and like a sample complaint. But there's so many ways. I mean, there's the various Facebook groups as well, which, I think the value that they bring is you get like some real life examples of cases that have worked. A lot of it is anecdotal, like speaking to other attorneys, what have you ever been successful in obtaining this type of benefit where the fact pattern was this, this is not something that you can always find by, doing research on, Ayla's website or any of the, the like Westlaw, Lexis, right? A lot of it is, realistically speaking, even though there is this benefit out there, how many people have actually tried to file this application and how many has USCIS actually approved? So I think talking to other colleagues, can be really helpful and educational, just kind of learning like what kind of could work or what is really risky and maybe not a good idea to pursue. Also finding mentors. I think the immigration bar is extremely friendly, willing to share, and there's a lot of attorneys that have developed like kind of like a niche practice. So if I am taking on a case that I'm not very familiar with, then I would try to see if I can find a mentor or a co-counsel who will work with me on that particular case.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a lot of important points. I mean, certainly experienced practitioners know this, but immigration law really is the various subfields of immigration law. They're really operating in different worlds. And if you're doing, a high volume perm with a lot of corporate clients, you're in a different world than if you're doing a lot of, removal defense and asylum.
Yeah,
You're working through different government agencies. You're dealing with a different client base from a different sector of society, and the considerations are quite different. I mean, if you're an immigration lawyer and you're working at a university, in there with their international students, that is, quite different than running a solo practice where you're doing a lot of fiance visas and family based immigration. So it's many different worlds, and it's really practically impossible to try to be the master of all of those subfields. So pick the ones or the one or the few that align with your talents, with your personality, with your career goals, and and focus your niche in that fashion. Certainly, there's tons of excellent CLE on immigration law. I mean, first and foremost, the ALA conferences, especially the national conference, which is really where you get up to speed. But you mentioned also taking cases pro bono. I mean, that's an excellent way if you're exploring a new area. Take a case pro bono. I mean, one of the ways that I got up to speed on removal defense is, when I first started, I volunteered with an organization that was run by the Texas Bar Association, and that was down on the southern border. And I took cases pro bono in the immigration courts down there. So that's another great way. And as you said, I mean, another important point that you raised is that the immigration bar, I've noticed, is a particularly open community. So you've raised a lot of important points there. And certainly, if you're in a state that has a particular certification of specialization in immigration law, like a few states do, certainly consider applying for that. That's also an excellent step. Let's talk about empathy and understanding, because it's really important. Your clients trust you when you're empathetic and when they have the sense that you understand them. And there's a lot of aspects to that. I mean, you have to be culturally competent as an immigration lawyer. So, Sway, how important is understanding clients' cultural backgrounds and experiences in your practice? And how do you think cultural sensitivity impacts trust? And do you have any examples where you've headed off or staved off potential miscommunications, or prevented miscommunications by your cultural awareness?
sure. I mean, if there was ever an area of law that exposes the attorney to a very diverse, clientele, it's immigration law.
For
Like
sure.
there are clients coming from all over the world, literally. So for my practice, you know, I should really make up a list of all the countries of, where my clients have come from. But, that's one of the unique things about immigration law is that you get to learn about people from other cultures, religions.
It's part of the satisfaction of being an immigration lawyer, frankly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when I first started practicing, I've worked at a number of firms, and at each firm, they each had their own kind of like different client base. So that's kind of how I, learned about, particular countries, what are, like some of the cultural norms within certain geographical areas. And so there definitely have been some times where communication styles were not like the same or were a little unexpected. Just, I think what I've learned is just be respectful and open-minded. I've had some clients that have a tendency to be a lot more blunt, in their communication style. And at first, it kind of threw me for a loop, but then just kind of realizing, oh, it's not personal. It's just, that's just how it is, and like being adaptable and adjustable to that is really important, just kind of like taking it into perspective, right? Not everybody is going to sound a certain way. Not everybody's going to, observe a particular religious, faith. But the more open minded, the better. And the other thing I've learned is don't take anything personally. If a client is kind of maybe venting at you, know that it's probably not about you. It's probably about them being in a state of fear or an anxiety, and they just have like they need to vent. And unfortunately, they can't vent at immigration, right? So, of course, although it's not fair, right? Like a lot of the time, the attorneys bear the brunt of it because you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of dysfunction going on with the immigration agencies.
You have to really be open-minded, and you have to be the kind of person who can negotiate these cultural gaps because they will come up unless you're dealing, I think, in an entirely employment-based context where you're dealing just with company HR people and that sort of thing, where there's very typical business norms. But if you're dealing with the general public, doing family immigration or something, you have to breach these cultural gaps. They'll show up in a lot of different ways. I mean, whether it's that is, clients try to haggle your fee when you're not expecting that. Like you're expecting that you tell them what the fee is, and they're not going to try to haggle you down. And in their background, that's they're used to trying to do that, and you might feel somewhat taken aback by that, but you have to sort of negotiate that somehow. There's that aspect of it, or it can cut the other way. It can cut the other way as well. I mean, way back when I was practicing, I mean, there were clients from particular ethnic groups, and there were other immigration lawyers who were members who themselves belonged to that ethnic group, and they would prefer to come and see an American. Like you can see all kinds of things, and you have to sense what's going on and be very flexible and very savvy and understanding to try to negotiate some of these situations.
That's funny that you say that because, yes, stereotypes do exist
Right.
no matter where you go, I guess.
How about let's talk about emotional support. So, in immigration law, particularly certain types of cases, let's say, what stand out: asylum, U visa, T visa, to name a few, VAWA. You're sometimes dealing with people who are in extremely emotionally stressful situations, and sometimes people who are actually deeply traumatized.
Yeah.
So I think you need to also, as an immigration lawyer, if you're going to be a good one, you need to recognize and address the emotional situation of your client while balancing your professional distance. You're operating as an attorney, but you are dealing with a client who may be traumatized, who may be in a very difficult emotional position. Give me your advice about this one.
Yeah, this is another tricky area. I mean, I would say that when I was earlier on in my career, I was a little confused about the role of the attorney. What's the appropriate role of the attorney when you have a client who, has faced trauma in the past? And I think some of the mistakes I made were trying to be more than that client's lawyer. So I've like made the mistake of trying to be the marriage counselor, right? Trying to be their therapist, which is not ideal because you're not trained, right? Like we're not trained to diagnose clients. We're not necessarily trained to, offer that type of support and
That's right.
counseling. So, it's really important to be empathetic, right? To be compassionate to clients. But I think, yeah, you have to be careful about overstepping your role as the attorney. There have been, and when I've had clients who indicated to me that they were like lacking in support, I've recommended that they seek counseling. And a lot of the time, the clients, you know, have obtained counseling as a result of that. So I think to that extent, you have, just kind of like being available to offer up whatever resources the clients can avail themselves of. But you yourself, it's kind of like not. I don't feel equipped,
No, and it's not your
on
role.
that.
I mean, you're also not situated in a context. I mean, if you're an immigration lawyer, let's say in private practice, and you're dealing and you are taking VAWAs and U visas in these types of cases where people have undergone trauma, you must remember at all times that you are operating as an attorney representing them in a legal process. Now, you are to approach being in that role with empathy and with appropriate emotional understanding, but you are not a social worker. You are not a psychiatrist or psychologist or anything like that. That's really important because clients, will and perhaps even unconsciously uh, attempt to draw you into
Yeah.
some of their problems, and you cannot do that, both from a practical standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, et cetera. Having a list of resources, whether it's domestic violence hotlines or counselors, or if need be, shelters or any other resources like that for people who are in crisis, especially pro bono services or other services that are available for people in crisis. Having that list is a good idea so that you can point people to appropriate support when you're ready.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And another aspect of trust, which is super important, is in your fees and billing. So, you will go a long way toward gaining your client's trust if you are clear and upfront about what the fees are going to be and what the expected expenses are going to be. Sway, talk a little bit about how you make your billing practices transparent and how you prevent misunderstandings around legal fees and expenses.
So I try to be as clear as possible in my engagement letter. I'm specific as to the scope of legal services. I also like to kind of limit my engagement letters. So, let's say it's a really complicated case that requires multiple steps. And in order to proceed to the next step, let's say there's a condition attached, like the petition has to be approved before you can then go on and try a joint motion to reopen the deportation order. So what I've been doing more and more is just kind of like, rather than having the client hire me for the whole, let's say, enchilada, right? I'll just like break it up into parts and I'll explain to the client, look, rather than, creating this giant like juggernaut of a retainer agreement, we don't really know if we're going to be able to reach steps A to J, right? So why don't you just hire me, for each step of the process, right? Because there's, for a lot of immigration cases, there's so many components and you can't necessarily proceed to the next stage unless you're successful in the previous one. For me, I think it's easier, and I think it's also easier on the clients as well to kind of like engage in these stages as opposed to saying, yes, I'm hiring you to handle the whole thing, and we're just going to label it getting me my green card, right? Because it's not that easy to obtain a green card in a lot of cases. So I find that like using this approach has worked out really well because for me, it's easier to conceptualize, well, what would be a fair fee for me to charge to do steps A and B, as opposed to I have steps A to J. What kind of, like, how do I even decide what's a fair fee for the whole thing? Um, so for me, that works really well because I'm able to break up the amounts that are owed, and I'm able to see, okay, we're successful in getting the first few stages successfully completed. Then I can know how far this case and how realistic is the chance of success ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. Billing in stages is super important. I mean, also, there are certain um, things that you should always consider putting in your retainer agreement or otherwise communicate to the client about various contingencies. Like, for example, appeals are always a separate matter. That should be something that you make explicit. If you're undertaking a type of case where an appeal, could be necessary in the event of a denial, and be sure to communicate front that the appeal is not included in the initial representation. Certainly laying out what the expected expenses are, but also putting in language that indicates that Other expenses may arise, filing fees may change, other services may be necessary, whether it's additional, translations or interpretation services or what have you, and put that into your, fee agreement and go through it orally with the client. It's worth going through these contingencies orally as well at the time, at the meeting where you agree to undertake representation in the case.
Yep. And also just kind of thinking through conceptually, like what could happen after filing, right? We know how USCIS loves to issue RFEs, right? So unless you're explicit in your retainer agreement and discuss with the client, well, what happens if an RFE is issued? Is that covered in the original fee, whether it's a flat fee or an hourly fee? So breaking it down to the clients, explaining to them what might happen, not to just assume that after we file a petition that immigration will just automatically approve it, letting them know that an interview could be required or a notice of intent to deny could be issued. I think that also goes a long way to also ease clients' concerns and also, again, build on the trust, letting them know these are the things that could happen, and being clear about like at what stage are additional fees required. So I try to be as explicit as possible, when talking about clients about where what to expect next in their case.
Absolutely. Let's talk about soliciting client feedback. This is another important aspect. I mean, in terms of gaining the client's trust, you want to ask the clients how their experience was with you, especially at the conclusion of the representation, and incorporate their feedback, their constructive feedback. So, what methods do you use for getting feedback from your clients about what they thought about your handling of their case? And have you found any areas where client feedback, encouraged you to improve in any way, or any success story where you've implemented any client suggestions?
I usually ask my clients at the conclusion of their case if they'd be willing to write a review for me. And if they are willing to write a review for me, if they could provide some examples of what it is that they liked about my representation, if they could be descriptive, and of course, some clients, not all clients are going to agree to write a review for you. It's human nature. Even though some clients, the reaction is always, yes, I'm more than happy to, but like they may forget, or they might just, things get busy, right? And then they just forget. But for my clients who have agreed to write reviews for me, I always ask them to just kind of be specific about what it is that they liked. Why did they choose to hire me? And that's how I've gotten feedback. There was one client who wrote a review, and although it was positive, he did say something that kind of caught me by surprise. I think he said something like, my communication style can be a bit brusque, which, you know, initially I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting that they posted that about me. But then it got me thinking like, okay, that's good to know. Maybe I should kind of be a little more cognizant of how I might come off sometimes. Because, I'll admit it, if I'm pressed for time, or maybe like not having a great day, maybe I do come off as sounding a little, impatient or a little too brusque. So that one client review has gotten me to think about, okay, yeah, maybe just kind of like watch my tone sometimes.
I mean, it's easy to survey your clients. I mean, there are a lot of tech tools for surveying your clients. You can, design a survey and utilize a tool for getting their feedback, whether it's through an email or through a text, and have them answer a few questions about how their experience was with you. And then you may want to. I mean, one of the things you can do if you're concerned that they, if you just invite them to post a review on Google or something, and you're concerned that you have no control over it, and they might say something that you don't want, you don't want out there, frankly. You may want to, do the survey first, and then just pick kind of pick the ones that are more or less favorable. Them write the reviews. I mean, that's one way. But definitely surveying clients. Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, we we exist to serve the clients within the context of the rules of practice. So, incorporating the client's suggestions, I think is important whenever possible. Um, but how do you ensure that your practice is continuously improving? I mean, are you doing regular sort of, let's say, audits of your practice in terms of how you're doing things in the office? I mean, how you're serving clients and identifying areas for continuous improvement? And do you feel that you are positioned uh, effectively with regard to all the innovation that's going on in legal practice nowadays, let's say AI and other innovations?
So it's interesting you bring.
You're laughing,
Well, because I'm a solo, right?
right?
So it's really me wearing all the hats.
Okay.
And if you know solo practitioners, like there's only so many hours in the day, there's only so much time that we have. But that is something I'm kind of going through right now, because I've hit kind of like uh, a certain level in my career where I've been doing this for 25 years,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm thinking about the big picture, like how much longer do I want to be practicing? And do I want to continue practicing the way I have been for the last decade, 2 decades and a half? Um, I'm also of a certain age, right? So technology is not my strong suit. So I have hired a consultant to kind of look into my the way I practice, and so we're looking into actually we just signed up to use a like a case management system, right? Everything used to reside in my head, and then I realized this is just not sustainable. Like I can't keep track of everything. It's just too much. So I'm, kind of signing up with a new CRM, looking into other ways that I can streamline, modernize, use tech more to my advantage. So yeah, it's interesting you're asking this question because I'm literally in the middle of doing this right now, just kind of like auditing the way I've been running my practice.
Well, there are some excellent consultants out there, who, for example, Immigration Finder is just one of many who deal with specifically with immigration lawyers and help them to optimize their practices and design and incorporate, processes for achieving maximum productivity and being sure and ensuring that you're, availing yourself of all the technology that will help you that you can leverage in order to be as efficient as you can. Regardless of whether you're solo, whether you're a small firm, larger firm. But I think it's especially important nowadays for solos and small practices to leverage technology because that's your equalizer, right? It can be a great equalizer. Is if you are leveraging technology, you can actually punch way above your weight in terms of the amount of work that you can handle and the effectiveness and your profitability. But so something to think about. So we've discussed we're getting to the end of the hour, but we've had a great time talking about the importance of gaining your client's trust and becoming a great immigration lawyer. So, I mean, Sway, are there any other thoughts you have about what it means to be a great immigration lawyer?
You really have to have a passion for wanting to help immigration clients, right? If the drive is not there, then why are you in this field? So that's kind of the reason why I got into it is because I come from a family of immigrants. I'm the first in my family to be born in the US, to go to college, to be a professional. So, I kind of saw firsthand like all the obstacles that immigrants go through. And that's what drives me, every day. You have to kind of have that kind of passion and that fire to keep going at it. And the other thing I would note is, immigration is a grueling, well, maybe I shouldn't say grueling, but it is challenging, right? It's a very challenging, fulfilling area of law. And if you want to kind of make this your calling or your career, just kind of think of ways that you can stay resilient, right? Because there's going to be many times that you're, kind of like, it's very much a David and Goliath, like, dealing with immigration is not easy, right? The government is very dysfunctional. Just think of ways how you can sustain yourself, right? And stay resilient. There's going to be times where you're going to feel like this is too much. Can I, especially during the previous administration, right? But what I
Which might
found,
be the next administration as well,
well, yeah, release exactly.
right?
So just kind of like, don't forget to care about yourself as well, because you have to have the oxygen mask on first in order to help others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's right. It's great advice. You've honored me by being my guest today to talk about living up to your client's trust. And thanks again for joining me on Immigration Uncovered. And please tune in to our next episode.
Thanks so much, James. I had a great time speaking with you.